We're now walking through into the other grand room on the side of this beautifully decorated hall of the Toledo Club with a magnificent ceiling high up here. We'll make our way. One of the great characters of Toledo, and perhaps the most famous artist of Toledo, aside from Joseph Kossuth, who's still alive and one of the founders of the art and language movement in the history of art, is Edmund Osthouse, who's one of the great painters of sporting dogs in the history of art. And he was actually born in Hildesheim in Germany in 1858. His father was a farmer. They were well-to-do, and his mother was an English woman. They grew up on a farm. He had plenty of opportunity to see sheep and dogs and deer and pastures. And his father worked as a secretary for the Austrian Archduke Maximilian, who was rather ill-fated and was overthrown and moved to exile in Mexico. So his father took the family to Mexico in 1864. But after the overthrow of Maximilian in 1866, the Osthouses emigrated to America, and first to Oshkosh in Wisconsin, and later to Toledo, Ohio. For the great fortune of everybody here, Edmund however, went back to Germany first of all and learned to study painting at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Dusseldorf. Anyway, in 1883, he rejoined his family here in Toledo, Ohio, and he married a lady from Milwaukee who unfortunately died 2 years later. But it was in Ohio that Osthouse met another extraordinary character, and we'll see his portrait later, David Ross Locke, who was the publisher of the Toledo Blade, and he was better known by a pseudonym, Petroleum V. Naseby. Now, Osthouse was a well-built, very refined character who had no problem blending in with the thriving Toledo industrial community at the time. So around 1900 and in the next decade, Toledo had, for example, the most advanced train system as a crossroads in America, and was a thriving city, giving birth, for example, to the Toledo Museum of Art in 1901. Edmund Osthouse was invited to be director of the Toledo Arts Academy that was established with Locke's help before he decided to open his own studio. And he, in the late 1880s, he partnered with a man called J.E. Berger, and they opened something called the Maumee Kennels in Toledo. This became a premier place for breeding setters and pointers. And Osthouse, therefore, was not just a painter of dogs, he was actually also a dog handler, he was a hunter, and he was a field trial judge, and often went to Florida each winter to judge the field trials. He also joined the Tile Club of Toledo, which was founded in 1895, and became its president. In fact, he served as its president from 1893 to 1903, before he became a board member of the Toledo Museum of Art from 1901 to 1911. He was really accurate in his painting of dogs. Each one of the dogs, and often this was the case also with sheep painting at the time. Edmund Levy, who founded the Toledo Museum of Art, bought a lot of sheep paintings. They were kind of substitutes for humans. So each character that was an animal was a particular character type, which also could be conveyed as a human acting on a stage. And so the stage sets are these paintings. And many famous people bought Osthouse paintings. Some of the wealthiest collectors in the country, like John Pierpont Morgan, or the Vanderbilt family. In 1911, the reason why Osthaus's term on the museum board stopped then was because he moved to Los Angeles. And he actually set up a home there, but he also came back to Ohio and went also to Florida. He died there in Florida, and the Toledo Club owns 4 paintings by Osthouse, and we'll see just a couple more as we move around the room. And one of the more famous, in fact perhaps the most famous events in the history of America that affects northwest Ohio is the Battle of Lake Erie, which was part of what's often called the Second War of Independence in America, which was the War of 1812, which was a reaction by American forces and essentially the establishment of the American Navy to stop British attacks, and particularly the engagement of Native Americans to curtail the expansion of the colonies. This painting was painted by Carlton Chapman in 1913. So 100 years after the Battle of Lake Erie, there was a major exhibition at the Toledo Museum of Art, and many, many works of art were gathered together to mark the event. And more recently, of course, we've had the 200th anniversary of the great battle, seen here from a different angle as Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry left one ship and managed to hide behind another ship to get onto a second ship and then take the British ships by surprise, sinking many of them. The Toledo Museum of Art has one of the remarkable portraits of Oliver Hazard Perry, which was painted by Gilbert Stuart and then finished by his sister. So important historical work for the Toledo Club. Among the landscape paintings of the Toledo Club is this painting by John Fabian Carlson, who was not only a painter, he was a teacher, he was an administrator, and he was a professional singer. He was the son of a tailor and from Sweden. So again, an example of artists from other countries represented here at the Toledo Club. His introduction to art came from an uncle who decorated landscapes on carriages. But it was when Carlson was 12 that his family relocated to America and made their home in Buffalo. He earned a scholarship to go to the Art Students League in New York. And he was part of a community that was established at Woodstock in New York. And he set up a studio just near there. He became a teacher at the Art Students League and in fact became the school's director in 1911. In 1918, the Toledo Club painting here that you see, this wonderful landscape, was awarded a very major prize, actually, the Carnegie Prize, and another prize called the Altman Prize, at the National Academy of Design's Winter Exhibition in 1918-19. And Carlson then decided to move to Colorado Springs. And he had an extraordinary capacity to create moody landscapes, a little bit like in Britain Atkinson Grimshaw did. He said of his work that emotion in a work of art was really important. It was important in paint that it should be beautiful and expressive, as abstract color and form should not interest us necessarily in any story outside of itself. So if the story took over, you had illustration. The painting had to be about paint. On the way back into the hall again, we have 2 paintings either side, which are both by an artist called Carl Albert Berger. He was born in 1883, died in 1952. And they are a pair. In fact, they're almost mirror images of a landscape scene in Stuttgart in Germany. That is where Berger was born, and that environment has many examples of medieval castles. So when you look at the tower here in these paintings, it is actually a Liechtenstein castle, which is a wonderful neo-Gothic castle, which was built in the 1840s in the Swabian Alps. It's a noted fairy tale castle of Europe. Fascinatingly, Berger was working in Stuttgart and then married for the first time and emigrated to Argentina, where he spent 22 years before returning to Germany near Munich in 1941, where he remained until he died in 1952. We're now going to go upstairs to the first floor, and on every floor in the Toledo Club you'll find works of art, and the members have become very familiar with them over the years, and it makes a grand institution for Toledo, Ohio. Again, whether it's the sconces on the walls, or the magnificent light fittings, or the railings, the fluting on the columns, all the dart mouldings as you walk up the stairs. This is a very grand building indeed.